I am Susan Baganz. I live in Fond du Lac, and I have been writing for 9 years now and editing. I work for Pelican Book Group as an editor, and that's also who publishes my books. So my topic tonight is spectacular starts and fabulous finishes. And so we're going to talk about ways to hone your novel after you get it written with NaNoWriMo so that it's going to sparkle and shine. This is not the kind of stuff you necessarily want to work on while you're writing that rough draft, but they are things to think about when you're going back and revising. So first, just some fun stuff, because Snoopy always makes me smile. "Help," she cried. "Help, help, 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 help." This is a very boring story. I'll add another help. Snoopy at his keyboard. Book 1, Part 1, Chapter 1, Page 1. What a great start. You should try writing an adventure story. Try writing about a real hero type. So Snoopy writes, "He was a dark and stormy night." Now this, I got 2 of these. It was the best of times, it was the somewhat less offensive of times. We've got to tighten this intro up. Or how about this one? It was either the best of times or the worst of times. It can't be both. Bring it back when you've made up your mind. And here we go. Poor Dickens. We've had a hard time today. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the utter despair. Winter of utter despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received, for good or for evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only. Tale of Two Cities. Very iconic beginning to a novel, however, would not fly today, would it? That is all one run-on sentence. But anyway, let's look at the 4 most important aspects of a story. And these are important because it's usually those first few pages, that first paragraph, that first sentence, that first 5 pages especially, that draws a reader in and makes them want to keep reading your story. So first of all, one of the things you want to do very quickly in your story is establish your protagonist. An example of this would be Little Women, Louisa May Alcott. "Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents," grumbled Joe. So there we have our main character established. Location is important. I can't tell you how many books I've read recently as an editor to look at contracting where I'm getting into the 2nd chapter and I still have no idea where this is taking place, or the time period, which we'll get into. So establishing a location. When I stepped out into the bright sunlight from the darkness of the movie house, I had only 2 things on my mind: Paul Newman and a ride home. I don't know why that other image is up there. That's The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, who ironically, or not ironically, but very cleverly used the same line at the end of the novel. So, which is really unique. And when I originally asked people, when I was doing this talk the first time, I asked people what their most, iconic, or what beginning or ending of a story that they really remembered. Nobody really had anything. But this was one that I've always remembered, because it's one of my favorite books. And I think I read it probably about 20 times before I ever saw the movie, which was I read this when I was 13, so that was a long time ago. I didn't see the movie until just a few years ago. It was okay. The book's still better. And time period. Again, I've read books where I'm like, when is this taking place? They're barefoot. So is this a dystopian novel? Is it fantasy? Or is it historical? I don't know. I'd like to know. I get frustrated. And the reader will get frustrated too if they don't know what the time period is. Now this one's a little more literal. 5 a.m. There you go. There's your time. 12 hours before a judge would declare her legally dead. Beth Zarnick Her Deadly Inheritance. Beth is actually an amazing author in that she worked on that book for 10 years. And when it came out, it ended up on the bestseller list, the top 10 bestseller list in its category on Amazon for, I think, at least 9 months. She really rocked it. She just had another book come out today. She lives north of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, but she's also a really good friend of mine. Inciting incident. We'll talk a little bit more about this too, but here's an example. This is actually not really an example of an inciting incident. I don't know why I put it here, but it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Definitely sets up the tone of the story, if you're familiar with Pride and Prejudice. This is The Breath of Dawn by Kristen Heitzman. Seeing Morgan standing still as a stone beside the freshly opened earth, Noelle St. Clair Spencer believed a man could shatter. So there you got kind of your inciting incident. Somebody's died, and you want to know what's going to happen next. So why are beginnings so important? Editors and agents are too busy often to read your entire manuscript or novel at first. So that first line or those first few lines are going to be the only thing that might get you a second look or keep the editor reading. I sometimes will read up to chapter 3. If I read past chapter 3, I'm reading it to the end usually unless something really falls apart. But a lot of editors won't read past the first page if they're not instantly grabbed. Readers can also be picky. It is often said, like I said, the first sentence, first paragraph, and finally the first 5 pages of your novel can make a huge difference. I guess I could also add sometimes your back page, that back cover blurb can make a difference too, because if you're in the library or bookstore picking up a book, that's usually what you look at first to decide if you even want to buy it or take it home. So why do they go bad? Why do beginnings go bad? We begin our stories at the wrong place. The first novel I wrote, The Virtuous Viscount, which is in the back, when I finally ended up revising it, it's been revised a million times, it feels like, and rewritten. I actually had to delete the entire first chapter because it was all backstory. So sometimes we begin at the wrong place. And sometimes we haven't learned to trust the reader's intelligence. We sometimes give away too much too soon. And we need to learn to trust that the reader is a lot smarter than we sometimes give them credit for. Now, the caveat I have is that while striving to be creative and using some of the techniques I'm going to show you today, realize that even as I looked through just a ton of books that I have, some of my favorite authors' novels, their first lines weren't anything so stimulating to warrant bringing them to you. Sometimes you just have to write what is on your heart. Not every beginning and ending has to be so literally stunning for your novel to be great. So don't beat yourself over your head trying to make sure everyone fits what I'm going to tell you. It's not always going to happen, and it doesn't always have to happen. You need to have some of it in there. You're not going to be able to do all of it all the time. So that's your little freedom to take a deep breath and go, oh, okay, good. I don't have to get it all right all the time. I wrote many books, and I got some of it right without even knowing I was getting it right because I didn't know anything about this stuff. So afterwards, I'm like, oh, that's what I did. Cool. So I'm going to use some of my books as examples of these things, as well as other writers, too. So chapter hooks. So we kind of talked about like the beginning, but chapter hooks are going to be a way, or even if you're coming out of a scene and into a new scene, a way to keep a reader hooked into wanting to keep reading. And so these are some of the tools that you can use, like stakes. I'm not talking about ribeye. What are the stakes and why do they matter? So here's an example from D. Henderson, True Honor. There was a bounty on Darcy St. James' life, and in the world where she once worked, having someone come after her was still more likely than not. So here we've got the stakes. Someone is out after her, probably out to kill her. So you've got your stakes. The negotiator. You're going to see a lot of D. Henderson because D. Henderson does it very well. They had a bank robber that had not bothered to get any money. Kate was already assuming the worst. So this was a new scene in a chapter, so it wasn't the beginning of a chapter, but it's foreshadowing and the stakes were high. So another way is hero or heroine identification. typically more at the beginning, but anytime you change a scene and you're going from the point of view of a different character, you need to make it clear whose point of view you're talking from so that the reader knows. There's nothing more frustrating than getting into a book and then you're like, okay, wait a minute, whose head am I in? And point of view is a whole nother topic we could cover. But here you're going to establish that point of view in the first sentence or two. And sometimes if you're writing from only 2 points of view, because I write romance, so I usually have a male point of view and a female point of view, sometimes I don't actually have to use her name or his name, but try to within that first line or two so that the reader knows whose thoughts they're thinking. An example, again, the negotiator. Kate O'Malley had been in the dungeon since dawn, chapter 1. So now we know exactly whose head we're going to be in as we read this section of the story. This is actually a nonfiction book. I highly recommend The Art of War for Writers by James Scott Bell, but I love this. Know the difference between a hero and a fool. So he's kind of giving you, that's like a nonfiction, but still it's fun. And this one was The Extravagant Fool. It's another nonfiction example because a lot of the fiction techniques work for nonfiction too, so I brought some of them as well. I'm sure my mom was joking when she wrote the words, "This child is off," in the opening chapter of my baby book. Kevin Adams is actually a friend of mine, so that's an excellent book. Anchoring. Who, what, where, when, and why. It's kind of the old journalism mantra. The negotiator again. This is a new scene introducing a new point of view. FBI Special Agent Dave Richmond dealt with crises every day of his life. However, being a customer when a bank holdup went down was not one he would recommend. So who do we have? We have Dave Richmond. What is he? He's an FBI Special Agent. When? Just everyday life. Where? The bank. And why? There's a robbery going on. So that's anchoring it into the scene. On the run, start in the middle of an exciting incident. This can be hard to do, especially at the beginning of a book, but it can be hard to do at any point in time. This is one of my attempts. You can decide if it's good enough or not. The sun blinded him, yet a flash in the distance caught his attention. Sure enough, another robbery of a coach by some hard-hand land pilot. Not again. Disgusted, Lord Charles Percy urged his mount into a gallop as he drew his pistol and cocked it. He aimed and shot the gun out of the ruffian's hand. The thief's horse tossed the rider to the ground before racing away. His own mount pulled up alongside the carriage, almost stepping on the bounder with his sharp hooves. He aimed the pistol. "I didn't mean to hurt no one. Don't kill me," the man groveled. "Either I shoot you now or you hang tomorrow." The man scrabbled to his feet and started to run, but Charles was a crack shot and brought him down. That's the Baron's blunder. Problem. You got to give him a problem, something that's going to need to be solved or resolved at some point. This is My Stubborn Heart by Becky Wade. I believe this is actually on the shelf upstairs here at the library. I saw you had some Becky Wade. There once was a girl who'd been praying for a husband since the 4th grade. Over the years, she prayed for his health, his happiness, his protection, and sometimes for his good looks. She prayed that she would meet him when she was meant to, except that she hadn't. So that's the problem. This is nonfiction, Extravagant Fool. It took a decade to build my ark and load up the family, but less than a second, it seemed, to blow it up and sink to pieces. That's a problem. So those are kind of tools for the starts. Do you have any questions about any of that? No? Okay. Let's look at some finishes. Because you can start stuff, but you also want to finish things so that you can really hook people in. A fabulous finish is going to keep people from putting that book down. And I was teaching about this at a conference this summer, and somebody said, well, I like to keep my chapters short. I want people to be able to, just read that little chapter and then go on with their day. And I'm like, well, I understand that, but, you really want to make it almost impossible for them to put that book down. Because, to be honest, some of the best compliments I get are when people message me and say, I am blaming you for being cranky today, because I didn't get to sleep until 2 in the morning because I had to finish your book. It's like, cool. Sorry you're cranky, but it's kind of a nice compliment when they can't put it down. All right, so here's some failure endings. Sleepy time slugs. These are the ones that make you go to bed and yawn. Doesn't move the story forward at all. Disaster averted. There's a failure to tie things up, kind of leaves things flat. And a three-peat, using the same ending over and over and over. You don't want to end your chapters all the same way because you need to mix things up, otherwise people get bored. All right, so how do we fix this? Change your timing. End in a different spot than someone might expect. This is from The Healer by Dee Henderson. Jennifer died feeling the warmth of the rising sun. That's an interesting way to end a chapter, don't you think? How are you going to keep going on a story when the character just died? She's not the main character of that tale, but still, it's cool. Mix up your endings. Keep some variety in how you end your scenes and chapters, which kind of goes against that, fixes that three-peat problem. She's a smart girl. Robbie nodded and smiled, and yet she married me. That's from my own book, Salsa and Speed Bumps. Nico jumped up and they ran back to the rental car and drove to their hotel. They ordered room service that night. I don't write sex on the page because I'm a Christian, so this is about as close as I get to it. But I can't end every chapter that way. It just doesn't work. People get tired of that. Here's a little different one, since I've only ever done it with you, dear. No. There's a first time for everything, isn't there? Pillow fight. She smacked him in the head, nearly toppling him over when he reached for her. Nico chuckled and joined in as he discovered there was apparently more than one it. So, might have thought they're going to start talking about sex, but no. Punch words. A punch word is a power word. It leaves an emotional impact. It delivers a blow to the reader. It addresses deep needs, or it stimulates strong emotions. So here's some examples of that. As I passed him, he whispered, "I'll see you hang if it's the last thing I do." This is from the book Shattered Trust, and actually it's not my book, it's Chris Richards' book. I don't know why my name's on it. So what's the power word, the punch word there? This is audience participation. Well, the whole phrase has power, but what's the punch word? It's hang. This is Stephen King on writing. We're talking about tools and carpentry, about words and style, but as we move along, you'll do well to remember that we are also talking about magic. So what's the punch word? Magic. That evokes emotion. The Art of War for Writers, James Scott Bell. There's no one way to approach your editing. The important thing is to make a way for yourself and then gasp. Follow it as if you were a bomb inspector going through the standard routing every time. So, what would be the punch word? I would think it would be bomb inspector. Yeah, there's some good strong words in there. You know, that's
every time could be.
Yeah, exactly. But when you do that, it grabs you, right? You're like, man, I want to read more. And that's what you want. Sometimes life was too complicated. Complicated. Gunshots erupted.
Mostly gunshots, right?
Yeah, I think did I pass one? Oh, here's one. She belonged, she was wanted, she was loved. That in 3 ways. There's actually 3 of them there. But again, that kind of ending, doing 3 things, it's kind of fun when you can do 3 things to kind of have effect, but you can't do that too often because people will get bored of it. And that gunshot is erupted. All right, anticipation. This lets the reader know that the issues are larger than the reader might originally assume. It may even tell you explicitly that something is about to happen. So here's Pesto and Potholes. God, I really don't want a man in my life right now. It's too soon. But what a man. So I write romance. You know they're going to get together. Marriage to Charles. As much as she railed against it, there was a part of her that trembled with excitement at the thought of more of those kisses and the sensations his touch elicited within her. Something that delightful certainly couldn't be good. There's wonder. It's time for bed. Not trying to rush this, are you? Me? No, of course not. Why would you think that? Johnny gave her a lingering kiss that promised more. There were some gifts he really did struggle to wait to unwrap. Katie was one of them. So, things are going to happen there. Cliffhangers. Do I need to define cliffhangers? Cliffhangers are great at the end of a scene or a chapter. They are not necessarily good at the end of a book. I personally hate it when I get to the end of a book and there's a cliffhanger, which means you have to buy the next book or pick up the next book, which might not even be out yet. By the time it comes out, 9 months down the line, you've totally forgotten the first story. So cliffhangers, though, are great at the end of a chapter or a scene. When it was this easy, it almost wasn't any fun. The breathless twit had rushed over to fall into Chet's arms. She deserved to burn. Daisy Jericho, who's actually Dixie Jarko, she's gone to her real name now, lives actually in Van Dyne. So she's a Wisconsin author, too. Time was running out. He could feel it in his gut. Her Deadly Inheritance by Beth Sarnick. Okay, questions. Asking questions can actually help you move the story along as well. Renata picked up the roses and wondered, what have I done? Okay, now you gotta keep reading to find out, what did she do? Pestle and potholes. Fed in freeways. Who was this woman and why was he only now seeing her? Buttons. These are not the things that you use to fasten your shirt. They're actually a simple sentence. So a little similar to a punch word, but slightly different because they're not necessarily there for that shock factor like a punch word is, but buttons are very short and sweet and simple. So here's 2 examples. Mission accomplished. It's the end of a short story that I did, Angel on 4th Street. Just very simple button. That's the end of the story. Now this next one is from The Negotiator by Dee Henderson, but I'm going to give you the setup for it so you can see how that button really is used well. The bomb goes off at 11:15. The plane is talking to the tower. Tell Kate O'Malley I haven't forgotten the past. She watched the clock, counted the planes touching down, and listened to the air traffic controllers. 11:12 a.m. There were still 9 flights in the air. 11:13, 8 flights. 11:14, 6 flights. She heard a controller give Metro Air Flight 714 clearance to land on runway 32L. 11:15. That's the way she ends the chapter. Do you think you're going to go to sleep if that's what you read? No, what happened at 11:15? Did the bomb go off? I have to read the book to find out. That's actually one of my favorites. Threat of death or danger. Always a good way to keep people reading. Salsa and speed bumps. A hand covered her mouth and foul breath tickled her nose. Don't scream or I will kill you right here and now. Louise had found her. The pizza fell to the floor. Dun, dun, dun. What's going to happen next? This one is Her Deadly Inheritance by Beth Sarnick. Slowly she leaned against the railing and bent forward. With a sickening wrench in the pit of her stomach, she backed away. The railing was too high. Her mother's death was no accident. She would have had to climb over the railing or be thrown over. The grandfather clock tick-tocked in the silent hall below while the carpeted floor beneath her seemed to undulate until she thought she might throw up. Then a door clicked softly behind her, raising the hairs on the back of her head. What's going to happen? I feel kind of like I'm torturing people when I do this talk because, now if you really want to know what's going to happen, you have to read the books because I don't tell you, because I don't give spoilers. Stephen King on writing. Writing is not life, but I think that sometimes it can be a way back to life. That was something I found out in the summer of 1999 when a man driving a blue van almost killed me. Now, I have to say, if you haven't read On Writing by Stephen King, I would strongly recommend you buy the book. The autobiography itself is worth the price of the book, but he also has great tips on writing. And you understand why he writes the way he does. Your past really impacts, it's a whole other talk I do, is writing your past into your fiction. He does it very well. Shock factor. Again, a little different from a punch word or a button, or even the threat of death or danger. It can kind of come with all of that. This is Shattered Trust by Chris Richards. Glory? What glory? There was no glory here, only pain, the pain I caused others. As I scrabbled again for the gun, the invitation to Steve's graduation caught my eye. It was leaning against the gun butt. I lurched over to pick both items up, but I fell again. From the floor, I grabbed the invitation. In the process, I pulled off the table covering the girls had made for me. I sat there with the invitation, page, and cloth in one hand, and the gun in the other. Hope, faith, glory, and dreams worth fighting for clenched and crumpled in one hand. The end of it all, wavering in the other. So you gotta ask, is he gonna kill himself or not? Prediction. This is the foreshadowing. It felt good to have someone to care for who cared in return. He wondered if he was falling in love. What a messy business that could prove to be. And of course, as the author, I made it messy, because that's my prerogative. Revelation of a secret. This is Pesto and Potholes. That night, Renata dreamed her monsters attacked her, attempting to overwhelm her, faceless but terrifying and ugly, and she lashed out with her feet and legs and screamed for help against the evil and darkness that threatened her. She shivered. The dream changed, and Tony was fighting by her side, protecting her and warding off the evil. He was intense and fierce, strong and careful to shield her, and managed to get her to safety and light. He kissed her hand, winked at her, and was gone. She knew it was God who fought her battles, but awoke doubly grateful. He had brought Tony to help her with the real-life flesh and blood battle waged that day. Her deadly inheritance? Up in her room, she lay in bed, haunted by his sad story. As she stared into the darkness, an unbidden memory surfaced, along with Maggie's words. If you stay, trust no one, especially the one who tried to end your baby's life by falling down the stairs. So those are secrets. Oh, and one more. Whitbeard roadblocks. Katie took a deep breath. Her suspicion had been correct. This Johnny was the same one from her high school days, the one who had crushed her heart and gave her the best gift ever at the same time. Her son adored him, and now Johnny sat in an oncology clinic, which could only mean one thing. The man she loved had cancer. Now let me tell you here, the secret is not that he had cancer. It's something she finally realizes, but the reader knows it already. The secret is that he gave her a gift. You gotta figure out what it is. All right, any questions about those? I feel like I'm whizzing through these pretty fast. Prologues and epilogues. Some rules of thumb. With a prologue, don't use it if you're trying to sneak in backstory. One of the things I often recommend to writers is to avoid backstory is to do character interviews. I'm not a planner when I write my books. I'm what they call a pantster. I write by the seat of my pants. So I don't know how the story is going to unfold. But if I interview my characters beforehand and have a good idea of what maybe motivates them, what kind of things have happened in their past, then it doesn't all have to be dumped onto that first page. And for an epilogue, don't use it to tie up loose ends or to make sure the writer gets it. Again, you don't want to insult the intelligence of your reader. And so the writer gets it, should be the reader gets it. I always find these little typos. This is why everybody needs an editor. But I do want to say there's a book, Anita Klumpers is another Wisconsin author, and she wrote a book called Winter Watch. I got to edit it. And she did something really clever with her prologue and her epilogue. I had never seen it done this way before. The prologue took place a couple of years before the story, That's not unusual for something like that to happen. But it was a different person completely. The winter watch has to do with a watch, so this watch gets stolen. The story picks up with this girl trying to find out who owns the watch. And it's a romantic suspense. And the story ends where they think they know who owns the watch. But then the epilogue is actually like hundreds of years before the story ever started, before the prologue. And you see how the watch was actually made and who it was designed for and what happened to it then. And it was one of those things where I got done reading the book and I thought, I really kind of believed it actually had happened. Like, how do you come up with this stuff? It was so amazing and very, very well done. So I like to talk about it because it was one of those things that stuck with me. That is all I have. Like I said, I went through this a lot quicker than I thought I would. Any questions, comments? I can also answer questions about NaNoWriMo if you're writing that. I've done it 8 years in a row. I'm not writing this year, but I wish I were, but some other things have taken priority.
Maybe like planning a wedding.
Yeah, planning a wedding has something to do with that. Anything else? Any other questions about writing, editing? You got me?
Can you talk about, you're talking about the beginnings of books and like how an editor would look at the first sentences. So what do you think, so once you have when you worked on the first pages and you have what you think you want to submit, what are the first steps that you would take if you're trying to publish something?
So if you're going to submit to an agent or an editor,
Yeah.
publishing house, okay, steps for editing. That's a great question. A couple of things that you can do after you've written that rough draft. This is kind of my process, so you might have to come up with your own. I will usually read through the story one time after I've written that rough draft, and I'll make edits and changes and try to find those mistakes, but usually at that point I'm too enamored with my story to look at it clearly. I will often set it aside for a month, 2. Sometimes, if I think the story itself is good, there's something called a beta reader, and different authors will use a beta reader at different points. I use mine early, some use it later. So I will actually use it after I've done a rough draft. I probably wouldn't have early on because my rough drafts were so rough, but I've got some of the stuff down now, and I give it to them and I say, just tell me, do the characters, are they likable? Do you like the storyline? Does it seem plausible? And ignore the grammar, ignore the spelling mistakes, ignore redundancies. I don't want to know anything about those. I'll catch those later. And then they give me that feedback. So one book, Fed on Freeways, I had given it to somebody who, it was about a musician. So I gave it to a woman whose husband was a musician. He was a worship arts director at our church. And she read it, and she came to me, and she's like, at this one point, I really think he would have been angrier at her, or she would have been angrier at him over what he did. And I'm really sorry. But then she's like, oh, and this was great, and this was great. I loved how you layered that. And I'm like, she's like, you planned it all out. Actually, I didn't. And she was like, well, I'm really sorry, because now, this scene, you're going to have to, do a lot of work. And I'm like, that's just color and shading. I can make her angrier. That might only be a couple extra sentences to amp up the anger. That was the easy part. So it's fun when people do that. Now, having said that, because sometimes the people I'm using as beta readers are not editors, they're not writers, they may overlook things and not be able to look at things as critically as other people. So I had a book contracted, and I thought it was pretty good, and my editor had been working on it with me, and it went to copy edits, and the copy editor tore it apart. And I was just like, oh boy, this is not good. Now I gotta go back and do a major revision of this book. It was actually supposed to come out last week. Didn't come out because it's still sitting on my computer. We postponed the release date a couple of months just because I'm planning a wedding, so I can't be working on the novel. But what I did is I asked another friend of mine who is an editor, and thankfully she's a friend, so she did it for free. And I said, would you just give me your opinion on this book? I didn't tell her what the other editor had said. I just said there were some issues, I want your opinion. And she actually came back with some of the same stuff. And God bless people who are brutally honest, even though it hurts. She said, you know, Susan, I think you got lazy on this one. Your character's not as well-rounded. You know, I think you got lazy when you wrote this. Yeah, she's probably right. So it's going to take a lot of work to get it up to running, and it'll have to go some more edits and stuff before it comes out. But thankfully, because I'm an editor with my company, my boss was good about allowing me that grace to work on it, and it'll come out when it's ready. No rush. Other publishing houses won't let you do that. Okay, so having said all that, so beta reader, get that stuff back, go back into it again with a more critical eye, look it over. I often, and I do this with any book that I edit, so if you want to write this down, or you can listen to the recording when you're done. I'm going to see if I can get all these. I red letter all these words because they're the most commonly overused words, and they are see and saw, hear and heard, look, knew and know, then and than, have and had. Trying to think if there's more. Those are the key ones, I think. I usually have a list in front of me, even when I'm to feel and feeling, which you only have to red letter feel because it'll do feeling. You can't do a universal, like changing them all to red letter if it's here, because here is also in heart. And unfortunately, if you write romance, heart shows up a lot. But if you do that, what happens is you can see where maybe you need to rewrite certain things. So you can't get rid of every have and had. You need those words. And you don't have to get rid of every feel and felt or knew and know. But if you're writing third person and she says, she knew that, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you're in her point of view, you don't even have to say that. Just say what she knew. You're kind of being redundant. So those are ways to clean it up. And so I do that with every manuscript that I write. I do it with every manuscript that I edit. There are 2 software programs, actually they're online, they're subscription programs, but they do have like a small section of them that you can go on and you can have them and analyze your manuscript, or at least a part of it. The one is called Pro Writing Aid, PROWRITINGAID.com. And the other one is Autocrit, AUTOCRIT.com. I used Autocrit for a couple of years, and it was really a good tool to help me learn to look at repeated words and phrases that I wouldn't necessarily see. And it's very natural when you're writing and you're rushing to get that first draft out, your brain just automatically pulls like maybe the last phrase or word that you used in a similar situation instead of varying the vocabulary. So it's a way to look at things maybe a little differently and a little clinically. The only caveat I would give to that is I've seen people use Autocrit or Pro Writing Aid to such a degree that they pretty much sterilize that manuscript and it loses all color and feel, and you don't want to do that. So, and I've had to add back in haves and hads. So you have to look at those words and say, do I need this word? Is there a better way to say it? A lot of times a then and a than are not even needed, but sometimes they are. So, and if they have a feeling, sometimes it's better to say what that feeling is or describe the feeling. So you're showing the reader instead of telling them she felt sad. Well, what is that feeling like? Tears welled up within her and she couldn't stop sobbing. Okay, now you know how sad she is. So those are ways that you can sharpen up your writing and get it ready. Trying to think, other things to look at might just be like those endings and beginnings like we talked about here. And especially that first chapter is so key. And I know a lot of writers will spend an inordinate amount of time on especially that first chapter. I don't, but I do try to find a way to start the story that's going to be captivating if possible. And sometimes you can't be so, like some of the ones I've showed you, they're not all going to be like that. But you want to do something that's going to draw that reader in, create an emotional connection, make them want to care about that character and their story. Otherwise, why would they want to keep reading? If they don't care, there's no point. Unless they're just one of those determined readers that they're going to read everything from start to finish, whether it's good or bad. but there's not many of those out in there anymore. Does that help?
Yeah.
So, and then, and always having extra eyes. We were talking earlier, the best way, I hate this, but the best way to really edit and to see how your work holds together is to read the entire thing out loud, or have a computer program read it for you. You will catch things that you won't catch when you're just skimming over it, because you just start to not be able to see things anymore. You know the story, you know the tale, you know the characters.
You know what you meant to say, even though it actually is missing the R for you, or.
Exactly. I had, yeah, the words you meant to say. I had a book that came out, and I was reading it. I didn't originally read my books when they came out, but now I do. But I was reading the book because it was one of my favorite stories. Yeah, it's like, I'm not supposed to have favorite children. I have favorite children with my books. But, and I got to a point where there was a homophone, and I'm like, oh no, it was the word undo, but it was the wrong word. And I just, in the context, and I'm like, how did all these eyes miss this? And it wasn't, we do print on demand for a lot of our stuff, so it could have been gone in and fixed, but I'm like, you know what, it's not worth it. It's a lot of trouble to go in and fix a manuscript, and anytime you do, you mess up something else. It just always happens. So I just said, you know what, at least the audiobook, nobody will know the difference, because it sounds the same. But yeah, I was just like, oh man, but things like that happen. So does that help? I hope it does.
Yeah, definitely.
I think the more time and space you give between some of those things, the better off it is. I know that we often want to get those books out fast, and I think when we rush things too much and skip that process, we lose something.
How many beta readers do you use?
One or two, it depends on what I can find. Sometimes I try to find somebody who's never read anything I've written before. That's getting to be harder to do.
Oh,
Thank you. And sometimes on my fan page on Facebook, I'll say I need a beta reader. I need somebody who's willing to read my book, rough draft, you know. If you're a grammar Nazi, not something you want to do because it'll drive you nuts. But if you're all about the story, then great. So sometimes I'll find people who do that. I've got some people who've done it more than once. Like when I had this manuscript that came back from the copy editor, I gave it to somebody who knows my voice really well and knows my other books, so that she could give me a very, very honest opinion. And I also knew that she wasn't going to, and she was like, I'm so sorry, you're going to hate me for this. And I'm like, why would I hate you for giving me your opinion when I asked for it? You know, I mean, I'd rather hear it now when I can fix it than have you writing a bad review on Amazon later on. You know, this author just lost it and just didn't develop her characters well enough. I hope she gets her act together. I mean, who knows what people could say. So yeah, I'm not sure if that really totally answers your question. One or two, I've sometimes done up to 3, it depends. I've got people that would more than willingly read everything I give them. I think just because then they don't have to buy the book, because they've read the rough draft, you know, because they just love the story. But, so it depends. I had another book that somebody was a beta reader for, and she loved it, and she said, and it took place, it's the one that had the undo pair. Part of the story took place in Scotland. It's Regency, so it's, really 1800s. And so she had an aunt who lived in Scotland. She's kind of my aunt in Scotland read it. And I'm like, oh, this would be awesome, because I don't live in Scotland. I've never been to Scotland. Did I get it right? You do all this research online, but, so she actually gave some really good feedback for me. She was actually really hypercritical about grammar and all the stuff that, I'm going to fix all that, But, and then she was also like, I'm writing early 1800s. They're going to be going through the Highlands on horseback. No paths, no roads. And she was giving me MapQuest information. Like, well, that trip should have only taken 30 minutes. Well, yeah, by car on a paved road, but not in the wilderness on a horse with no path. You're going to take it slower, you're going to be more careful, and you're going to have to stop and use the bathroom and cook lunch and, things, and hunt for your food. I mean, so things take longer. So there were things that she didn't get that just was like, okay, but time period wise, yeah, 30 minutes, nah, it's not going to happen that way. So you sit there and you look up things like how long would it take somebody to get from here to there on horseback? And then you take out roads, you take out posting ins and all that stuff. Now you can add that time in. So I wasn't going to shorten the time just to make her happy. But she did give me some good ideas, and she gave me some good information. Like she gave me a prayer that the Scottish people would pray before a meal, which was cool. And she gave it to me in the Scottish Gaelic, so I could actually write it that way, which was neat. So that was cool. So yeah, sometimes you never know. You might get surprising people that can pop up and give you feedback. The hard thing is to know who do you listen to and who don't you listen to. And you have to know your story and what you want to fight for. You're going to have that with editors too. I've had editors want to change things in my story, and I've had to fight it sometimes. I mean, sometimes you have to say, okay, you know what, that's not worth fighting over. But I know in my first book, I had an editor, she was like, oh no, she wouldn't have done this, she's grown too far. And I said, no, because when people are under stress, they might have grown emotionally, but when push comes to shove and there's a huge stressor that triggers something, they're going to revert to what's familiar. And I have a degree in counseling psychology. My master's degree is in that. So I think I know a little bit about that, more than she does. So I won, and, and I got to keep that. Because the way she wanted me to rewrite it, I would have had to rewrite the whole rest of the story. It changes the whole trajectory. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I had it in my last book too, where an editor took exception to something, and she deleted like 7,000 words out of my manuscript. It was a real pain getting it put back together again. But she had, if she would have just said, I got a concern about this, I could have fixed that and made it work. But it was, like adding 2 sentences, that's all it would have been to make it different and make it palatable to her. But different things will trigger people.
Is that normal for an editor just to make edits without talking to you?
No. And these were copy editors. Copy editors should only be doing, final touch on the grammar, making sure the punctuation's there, that your yours and yours and yours and your twos and twos are the way they should be. And find the homophones. But, so I've had it twice now where 2 different editors have decided that they were gonna go ballistic on my novel and try to rewrite things. Which then, as an author, you feel like, am I just like a crappy writer? But people have opinions. And so you sometimes have to say, okay, how much of this is true? Like when my friend said, I think you just got lazy here. Okay, well, maybe I need to go back and do some work and flesh this out more. Because she's not somebody who's going to change my voice. And she knows me well. So, all right, I'll take the criticism and grow from it. But it sometimes means you have to, like in this case, I had to let go of a release date. So the book's not going to come out. I've had a lot of books come out this year, so it's not like I'm hurting for those. But still, it's nice when they do. So, any other questions? You got me. I'm here. What are yours?
Did you say that yours are audiobooks as well?
I'm working on recording audiobooks for my contemporary series. We only pay based on sales. And so a lot of audio actors don't want to work that way. We have an audio actress who's doing my Regencies. She's from Great Britain. So she pronounces everything the way they pronounce it and has the accent, which is kind of fun. Ben and I have been listening to those to proof them, so that's been kind of a fun thing for us to do. I'm still working on my first book, Pesto and Potholes. I had surgery in August, and now I'm in the process of getting ready to move and have a wedding, so that recording is on hold. But once we get moved in, my hope is in January I can get back to recording because I'll have an actual space in our house for that. Because that's the hard thing, is finding not just the time, but the quiet to do the recording. So I've got the equipment, but the most I can do in a day is about 2 hours. Then I start tripping over my tongue. I might be able to get 2, maybe 3 chapters in, and then I have to edit. The editing takes time too. That I don't need quiet for. I can put on my sound blocking headset and I can cut and paste and double check everything. But it's tedious. But yeah, I couldn't find anybody to do them, so I'm doing it myself. But my boss okayed it. So that means I'll get paid, when those sell, I'll get paid as the actor and as the author. So I'm like, that's like double dipping, isn't it? Is that okay? It is. All right, cool. So, but, I've got, 6 books back there that need to be recorded. So, yeah, that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So you can think of, you get a 30-chapter novel, that's at least 60 hours, if not more, of recording and editing time. So, yeah, it's a lot.
Have you run across anything when you're reading yours for audio now that you're like, oh no, I wish I would have said it differently now that I'm reading it myself out loud?
Do I find changes that I wish I'd made? Yes, I do. I find things that I think, oh, I could have written this better. But that's normal. Any author you talk to will tell you that if they go back and read their first work, they're like, oh, I could have done that better. I could have written that tighter. I could have, but you learn with everything you write. And so you have to kind of give yourself some grace to say, I did the best I could with what I knew at that time. It's good. Could it be better? Of course it could if I wanted to take the time and rewrite it and re-release it. Some people do that, Maybe 10 years down the line, if the book gets pulled and I want to release it again, maybe I'll rewrite it. Maybe I'll go through that revision process again and put it out with a new cover and stuff like that. Not going to worry about it right now. But it can be done, and that's what some people do. I've had some authors re-release old manuscripts that we've gone through the entire editing process again to make it better, to bring it up to speed, tighten the writing a bit, maybe flesh out things more that they've learned and want to make it different. That's the fun of doing it, but it's a lot of work. A lot of work. So yes, I find things. And I find things too when I'm listening to the audiobooks. Where I'll find that maybe I wrote down the wrong name for a character. I'm like, wait a minute, and I'll go back to the book and, nope, the actress read it right, so I can't make her change it because that's the way I wrote it. So if she gets it wrong and I wrote it right, then she's got to change it. But if I wrote it wrong, it's my fault. So, but you always hope that the readers will be so in love with what you're writing that they won't notice those things. So, but we're always going to be growing. We're always going to be learning. Nobody's a master in this field. We're all learning, and the rules keep changing too. So, you look at Dickens. You look at the way we write now. The rules change. So, even just the Chicago manual style is what I use for editing, and that's so thick a book, and they keep coming out with new editions. So somebody said, yeah, don't memorize it, because just when you think you got it down, that's when they'll change the rules. So you'd think they'd be static and nothing would change, but, there's a battle over a comma, so to have it or not, where to have it, how many times do you want to have it? So.
Oxford comma, yes or no?
Exactly, we do the Oxford comma. Yeah. There's a fun article. If you look it up online, it's just like AP and Chicago manual style riots in Chicago. If you type that into Google or whatever search engine you use, you'll come up with this fun satire about, I don't know if The Onion did it, but about how that there were murders and people being killed over the Oxford comma. The two different houses, AP style and Chicago manual, duking it out. They're gang violence in Chicago. So, as if we're really that brutal, but it's funny. It's funny. I love satire. It's clever writing. Anything else? Sure. Mm-hmm.
Are there any standards that, like, for historical fiction that publishing houses would be looking more for, or is it just kind of whatever comes across your desk?
Publishing houses, let's see, Amish is still going well, whether it's historical or contemporary. Regency isn't necessarily on the upswing. It still sells okay, but Christian Regency isn't quite as big a seller as the secular one, because, we don't have the sex. Well, it's the truth, Georgette Heyer and some of those authors probably wouldn't sell as well today because they kept things clean and light and sweet. But the World War II stuff is still selling really well, I think. I know a lot of people have been doing that. Like I said, Amish, I was told I had an agent for a while, and she's like, write Amish. And I'm like, I don't want to write Amish. I don't like Amish. I don't really read Amish. I've read some, but no, I don't. I've got some issues with Amish. I'm not going to do Amish. But she's like, but it's a guaranteed sell.
And then
And I even, when I went to a conference, somebody sat down with me and said, and on the website for the publishing house I was with got bought out, the previous one when I was in, it said, no Amish. I'm like, what am I looking for? I like romance, I like this and this and this. No Amish. And she came down and she's like, I know your website says you don't take Amish, but I'm like, you've got to be kidding. You're going to sit down and pitch an Amish story to me? I said, no, is it a comedy? Is it a comedy? Then I might be interested. Give me an Amish comedy, that would be cool. Cozy mysteries are kind of big right now. Romantic suspenses always do very well. I'm not sure if that really answers your question. I don't know that everybody's really looking for something specific. You'd have to check with each specific house. And that's the challenge is, it's really a very subjective thing. I get to choose kind of what I want to work on. So if a dystopian novel comes along and it doesn't grab my interest, I'm not going to be compelled to go for it. Amish comes along, it's going to be an automatic no. But I've done some sci-fi and I've done some fantasy and some of that stuff, the speculative fiction as they call it. It's not my favorite thing to do, but I've done a few of them. If it's a good story, I've done some suspense, just pure suspense novels. Those still sell pretty well. But yeah, like I said, suspense and romantic suspense are probably really big ones. Those are, and those can, like now my Regencies are called Gothic because they're technically romantic suspenses, but they just take place in the Regency time period. Most romantic suspense is considered contemporary, but you can do it historical too.
So like right now I'm working on a rough draft right now, so it's gonna be a while before I actually get it possibly the publication. But it's a World War One, and there is some romance in it, but the romance is the plot.
You're just doing historical, primarily.
Yeah.
World War One is a thing.
Just kind of wondering if maybe the publishing house would be willing to at least look at it.
I've got some friends who do some World War One, and so they've been able to sell them. So I don't think it's quite as big a niche as the World War II, but I still think there's an audience for it. People who love the historical stuff and love the war-based novels. I've got a friend who does Civil War. That's her thing. She does all the Civil War. Actually, her books are upstairs too. Andrea Bouchard does Civil War romances. But again, those are historicals, usually with a romance in it.
I usually have historical romance in my books. Some of them I actually don't even have romance on. They're not straight romance.
Well, so you have when my Regencies are historically set, but they're romances. So they're Gothic Regency romances. So they're romances that are set in the Regency time period. So I have to have the time period and history correct, but it's not about the time period. Whereas if you're writing a historical novel, it's about the time period. And then any romance is kind of a side thing. So that's kind of where the difference is, because I know some people are like, well, I write historical romance. Okay, do you really write historical romance? Are you writing historical? I write romance, I write Regencies. I don't call them historical, even though they are, because it's mostly romance. And that's kind of the hallmark of a Regency anyway, is that it's romance. So I just throw a little bit of darkness in there for the fun of it. Give them some evil to fight. So, does that help?
Yeah.
Good.
I just want to make sure that the book I'm writing, if any that's traditionally published, that it might be marketable.
Yeah, I think, and I go to a lot of conferences to teach, and I just tell people, don't write to the market, because the market changes.
Yeah.
Because this one gal that sat down pitching Amish, I'm like, why did you write Amish? Well, because it sells. Did you want to write Amish? Not really.
And that's why I've never done romance or beyond.
Yeah, write the story that's on your heart, the story that's within you, and worry about the marketing later or the sale later. Not every book you write has to be published either. Sometimes you write a book and it just needs to just be written. It doesn't necessarily have to be seen by the world. And that's okay. It's okay to write a book and not do anything with it. You learn, and I've had to rewrite stuff, and I've had authors where, I've sat down with and I've given them critiques, and I'm like, you need to, delete this and move this around, and they're like, oh, I wasted all that time. It's never a waste. It's always a learning experience. So if you can think of it that way, then, it's never a waste. Even if you never publish it, it's never a waste. Something in you had to get that story out. And so there's something that happens in you when you do that. Whether it benefits anybody else or not is beside the point. That's between, you and the page, and maybe God, for me it's with God too. I have to get that story out. Now, something happens in me that I need to tell that story somehow. Maybe there's something that has to work out in me emotionally or spiritually. Maybe someday that'll be a blessing to somebody else when they read it. But initially it's mine. I write for me first. So I don't worry about the audience. Be nice to write Amish and make a lot of money maybe, but because some of the Amish writers do make pretty good money. But it's hard to make money in this business. So if you're writing for money, don't, because it won't work out that way. Anything else? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much.